Christ reigns supreme in redemption. In a sense, Paul shifts gear into the realm of redemption or new creation from being supreme in all creation. Often the organisation of church gets a poor reputation, sometimes deservedly. Sometimes it's called a man-made institution, but Paul takes a very different approach. He claims the church was God's idea. As one commentator suggests, the church as intended, and we'll see what that looks like, is actually proof of divine genius. So let's see what Paul says here. He says, and he, speaking of Christ, is the head of the body, the church. If he is supreme over all creation, like Paul has just argued in part 1, here in part 2, Paul is saying he is supreme over the new creation, his church. He's the head of the body. He continues, he's the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything he might have the supremacy. Wright explains beginning here as Christ being the first principle or source of his church. I love one of the phrases used. He's the creative initiative behind it. I love that. The phrase firstborn from among the dead was the same idea as before in part 1. He's first in rank or status. He's exalted, descended to heaven. At the right hand of the Father, he has inheritance rights over his church because it's his idea. New life is offered to all who believe in Jesus. And he talks, there's the link here is to the resurrection. So there's this idea that there's a fresh resurrection power that is unleashed upon the world to create a new humanity. A community forged without racial divisions, without class distinctions or any other dividing walls. The architect of this new community, both locally and globally, is Jesus Christ, who is Lord of all. See, church is God's idea. It's the hope of the world under the headship or leadership of Christ. And as its head, Jesus grants and sustains the life of the church, just as he does in creation. The church is a group of believing people who have placed their whole weight of faith in Jesus, who are seeking to love those around them, as he's already said, and are inspired by the hope he brings as central to God's cosmic purposes. So as the church fulfills its purpose as intended, as we become a community of faith he desires, perhaps the supremacy of Christ becomes more visible. Powerfully, one of the commentators, Garland, declares, if Christ is the head of the church, it means that the destinies of creation and the church are bound together, and that all of God's purposes for all of creation gestate in the church's congregational life. Paul goes on then with another just mind-blowing comment. He says, for God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, in Jesus. So the Son has the supremacy because he has the fullness of God dwelling in him. God's fullness was pleased to become incarnate in the Son. God was only too delighted for Christ to become the full embodiment of the divine. You see, Jesus was fully God and fully man. He is the God-man, if you like. And then he continues this, in a sense he explains why. He says, and through him to reconcile all things to himself, all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. The purpose of the Supreme One in creation and redemption becomes clearer. It says to reconcile all things to himself. See, no one else is qualified to bring these two warring sides together. Christ is fully God and fully man, so he can see both sides, both perspectives. He stands alone as the mediator, able to reconcile lost sinners like you and me to a holy God. Paradoxically, the plan of deliverance was a conquering love through suffering and death on a cruel cross. You see, normally in the world, everyone asserts their independence, reaching or attempting to be in control, trampling others in their path, grasping after power, and placing ourselves at the centre of the universe. That's a miserable atmosphere, but it describes sin's hold on humanity and exposes our need for rescue. Christ, in total contrast, the preeminent ones, he lays down his life for our sakes. He embraces a violent scenario in which the unthinkable happens. His own creatures attempt to exterminate their creator. To the mighty Romans, this display of weakness and powerlessness sounded like a crazy way to deliver anyone, yet it was God's genius design. Only his voluntary, courageous, substitutionary death can bring peace with God and reconciliation to the Creator of the universe when we bow the knee and ask for his forgiveness. The phrase I want to finish with that really touched me, one of the people I read, C.S. Eliot, he alluded to Jesus and he called him this, the still point of a turning world. And I love that. Whatever circumstances you're living through, whatever's going on in your world right now, as the world tosses and churns, take this to heart and remember that whilst the world is turning and churning, the supreme Son of God is fixed, he's solid, he's dependable. And the only question left for us all to ponder is, have I given Jesus Christ the supremacy in my life? I'm your host, Matt Tuttleby of Bundoran Bible Reflections. God bless.